And the big question we're asking today is, what does the arrest of Congressman Collins mean for the midterms? Joining me, NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, NBC News investigations reporter Tom Winter, New York Times chief Metro political correspondent Shane Goldmacher, and former federal prosecutor and former SEC enforcement attorney Seth Waxman. Tom, I do want to start with you because you've been following this. You were downtown a little bit earlier today. Here's a statement from Collins' lawyer saying, "We will answer the charges filed against Congressman Collins in court and will mount a vigorous defense to clear his good name. It is notable that even the government does not allege that Congressman Collins traded a single share of Innate Therapeutics stock. We are confident he will be completely vindicated and exonerated. Congressman Collins will have more to say on this issue later today." Collins did not sell his own stock.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the indictment makes that clear. He couldn't sell his own stock because this company, which was based in Australia, they had halted shares pending the news that Collins had received. So he was not in a position to be able to trade his shares. However, the issue that he has from a legal perspective is when you're on a board of directors, you can't take information that hasn't been released publicly yet and trade on that information or let other people know about it unless it's been released publicly. If he had known this information and then the company put out a press release and then his son had traded the stock, we're not sitting here talking. There's no legal issue at that point. But what he's been charged with here is taking that information, just as you read before, picking up the phone and calling his son, and then his son starts putting in sell orders on the U.S. markets, which were not frozen at that time. And so they were able to avoid those losses that you referred to earlier.
And again, this is coming out of the SDNY, also investigating Michael Cohen. We should note that. But they seem to certainly come prepared for this. They came out with phone logs. They had dollar amounts. They had text messages. Right. They knew where Collins was when he was making these phone calls.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the amount of detail that's stated in here, they clearly have his emails because they have his reply to the company's CEO once he received this information. Wow, makes no sense. How are these results even possible? Three question marks. So they have a ton of evidence here that they've already laid out in the indictment. We as reporters love it because we get a lot of detail and a really good sense of this case. But it just shows the depth of which they were able to investigate this ahead of time. There's a number of co-conspirators. It's certainly possible that they might be in a position to offer additional details to the government. Obviously,
the co-conspirators are family.
Yeah, they're family. In one case, it's his son's fiancée is one of the identified co-conspirators.
And they could be potentially witnesses for the government?
They could potentially be witnesses for the government. We've seen no filings to that, no public indications of that. We want to be clear. But all those people, their communications that they have, any communications that they have with brokers, the SEC said at the press conference that they have recorded telephone conversations from the brokers' side of things, so those do exist in this case. And obviously they have a tremendous amount of trade logs, so they'll know exactly when people logged on to their online accounts to be able to trade this, the exact orders that they put in. When you come to trying to track stock trades, particularly when they're done through public markets like this, it's really easy for the SEC. We're not talking about SEC Capital and Steve Cohen and some of those infamous insider trading cases where they were using dark pool platforms. They're routing shares through the New York Stock Exchange. They're routing shares through all sorts of different brokerage houses. These people traded stock much the way you and I would trade stock.
This is much more straightforward.
This is much more straightforward. It's pretty brazen, actually.
We're going to get to more of the legal aspects of this in a moment. And again, this hasn't come out of nowhere. Collins, there were already questions about Collins's trading for the past year and a half or so. But let's bring in Chuck Todd to talk about the politics of this. Today was not a good day for Republicans by all accounts. This Collins news only made it worse. The Buffalo Times is reporting that they received an email that said Collins is going to continue running for his seat this November. Chuck, what does this mean for the midterms?
Well, look, first of all, it's a very complicated process, it appears. And Collins would have to cooperate, saying he would want to resign his seat, would want to pull out of the nomination if you want to do that. Remember, those in New York State wondering, wait a minute, the primaries haven't happened yet. Oh, no, your congressional primaries already happened. It's your state level, the Cynthia Nixon, Andrew Cuomo, and the other state races, non-federal races. Those primaries still haven't happened. But Collins has already certified. So the process is very complicated. But if you're the Republican Party this morning, it was already a bad night. And then before 9:30 a.m., you've got an arrested congressman. And by the way, in a totally unrelated situation, there is a local special prosecutor appointed in Virginia Beach to look at another incumbent congressman, a Republican, who apparently had campaign operatives falsifying petition signatures to get a third candidate on the ballot. Point is, you're having a bad legal day on Wednesday after a horrendous political day on Tuesday. But here's what I would say about this seat. It's a Republican seat. It's strongly held. But I'm having flashbacks to 1994, a big wave year for Republicans that year. There was a Democrat by the name of Dan Rostenkowski, longtime Democrat, very solid Democratic district. And the Democrats thought, well, rather than resign, he can hold the seat, and then they can win in a special maybe in the spring. Well, a Republican won the seat in the fall. So I would say all bets are off. When you're under a criminal investigation by the federal government and you're on a ballot, I don't care how solid your district is, you're probably politically in trouble. And the Democratic candidate there is a local elected official. He's not just some gadfly. So I think it's an added headache to the Republican Party's hopes of trying to control the House.
Chuck, listen, Chris Collins is far from the only lawmaker to come under federal scrutiny or to be under this sort of investigation. Bob Menendez was under investigation, the Democratic senator from New Jersey, and he kept his seat in the Senate during that time. He was ultimately not acquitted, but there was a hung jury or mistrial. But Chuck, in terms of the broader question about what the Republican Party is facing in the fall, and the broader question of how this government is being run under Donald Trump and how swampy it looks under Donald Trump, to have one of his earliest and most vocal supporters be arrested for, as Tom Winter pointed out, pretty brazen, according to prosecutors, insider trading.
You know, it's funny. Many of the wave years that I've experienced covering politics the last 25 years, it's sort of like there's a political problem, and then all of a sudden the political problem leads to the corruption problem starts surfacing. Happened to the Democrats in '94. They were already dealing with a political problem. Then suddenly, as more people realize, oh, there's a corruption stink, and it almost makes the wave stronger. It happened in 2006 with the Republicans. They already were having problems because of the Iraq War. There was a corruption stink, and all of a sudden, Democrats got stronger, and they had an even better night. That's the danger here for the Republicans, is that there's a larger narrative that it's not just the president's unpopularity, but hey, boy, is there a kleptocracy going on in Washington? Do they not think the rules apply to them? Look at the last 72 hours, Katie. I think you and I have been texting back and forth, whether it's the Forbes story on Wilbur Ross and the idea that it accused him of being a grifter of sorts, a billionaire grifter in his history, the Commerce Secretary. Or the story by ProPublica today about 3 Mar-a-Lago club members being unofficial senior advisors to the VA, none of whom ever served in the military, mind you. Or the story, or watching the Manafort and Gates trial, where the two of them are sort of swamp creatures and how they did business in Washington. Now throwing Chris Collins. All of these people are close, have some sort of close friendship with the president. So it only sort of adds to an ugly stew that is already difficult for the Republican Party to deal with in November. And I think you throw in the ingredient of corruption, and it can supercharge a political atmosphere for a political party. Not
to mention the reporting by our own Anna Schechter and Cynthia McFadden about the Trump Hotel.
I left out the Saudis of the Trump. There's that. Never mind. I think there's a couple of, I mean, you're right. Again,
It's continual. There's story after story about how this administration is taking advantage of their position or things they're doing wrong when they are in a position of power. Right. Shane, you've been covering this story as well. This is far from the first time that we've been hearing Chris Collins' name in connection with questions, at the very least, about his trading. Jake Sherman's First Read in January 2017, a year and a half ago, notes that Chris Collins was overheard talking loudly into a phone just off the House floor, bragging about how many millionaires I've made in Buffalo in the last month. He was bragging about a stock tip he had shared with people.
Yeah, I mean, you heard Chuck talk about this as well, right? This was brazen, allegedly, because he was already under investigation when he made this phone call to his son that federal prosecutors say happened on the White House lawn. Congress was already looking into his ties to this company, in which he had other members of Congress buying and investing in. So for Chris Collins, to be doing this allegedly while at the White House, while knowingly under investigation, is really quite a bold step. And I think, as Chuck said, this adds to this question of swampiness, right? All of these things add together. This is an indictment during a corruption trial after other allegations among other people in the administration. And it all adds up to sort of more and more bad news for the Republican Party right now.
And Seth, the indictment itself, 30 pages, pretty detailed. What sort of case is this?
Well, this looks like a straightforward insider trading case where you have two parties that are typically culpable. You have the tipper, in this case Representative Collins, and the tippee, his son. The tipper, Representative Collins, had material, non-public information, shared it with his son, and the son shared it with others. And the people receiving that information dumped their stock to avoid losses. And the other thing that really stood out to me in the indictment is you have these unindicted co-conspirators. And you have this call that took place between Congressman Collins and his son, and they describe in the indictment what was said during that call. That tells me that one of those unindicted co-conspirators may be talking and explaining to federal law enforcement what either the son or Representative Collins said during that call.
And let's put up a full screen of the timeline that was in the indictment of the moments after Collins learned of this trial failure and what he did in those following moments. At 6:55 p.m. on June 22nd, 2017, Innate Immunotherapeutics Chief Executive Simon Wilkinson informed Collins by email that the test for the drug had failed. 15 minutes later, Collins called his son and told his son about the failed drug test. June 23rd, 2017, at 7:42 a.m., when the stock market was open for trading again, Cameron Collins sold more than 16,500 shares of Innate Immunotherapeutics stock. Later that day, Cameron Collins placed 17 more orders to sell the stock. 3 days later, Cameron Collins placed an additional 36 sell orders. June 27, 2017, news of its failed drug test became public, and the stock plummeted by more than 90%. What's going to happen to Cameron Collins and the others that are named in this indictment, Seth?
Well, they look like they're in for a really long and difficult battle. I mean, you don't even need an insider or a cooperator to tell you what that looks like. I mean, circumstantially, those calls and that timing and that trading is kind of classic insider trading. So they've got an uphill battle. You throw on top of that maybe 1, 2, or maybe as many as 6, as we're seeing in the indictment, unindicted co-conspirators, which may mean that they're under an indictment, a separate indictment where it's sealed and they've pled guilty, or maybe they've been given immunity. And goodness, we've heard enough about that in the Gates trial that's going on right now. So it looks like everyone involved in this most recent indictment involving Representative Collins have a difficult legal battle facing them.
Shane, one last thing, politically speaking. The House Ethics Committee started investigating Collins' stock trading a year and a half ago, around the time that these questions came up, and he was overheard on the phone bragging about the folks he'd made rich. One of those people, Tom Price. At that time, when the House Ethics Committee was investigating the stock trades, Collins' spokesperson called it a, quote, partisan witch hunt. Sound familiar?
That sounds very familiar. And Collins has already been racking up legal bills from that House ethics investigation, as well as maybe now this federal investigation. He's already spent $250,000 from his campaign funds to his lawyers. He has $1.3 million left. But he's up for re-election. It looks like he wants to run for re-election. It's tough to get off the ballot. How much of that money does he want to spend on a campaign versus dipping into his own money to defend himself in a legal battle here that could be sending him to jail?
Shane Goldmacher, Seth Waxman, Tom Winter, and Chuck Todd, who had to run because he's got his own show to do. Guys, thank you very much.